Do you want to make your own games but don't know how to code? Modding is an easy way to get started, and I'm going to walk you through it step by step. Today we're using the Age of Empires 4 content editor. Let's get into it. When you open up the game, you'll notice this mods tab on the menu. Then you can click all mods, and you'll notice in this drop down there are multiple types of mods available made by other members of the community. Crafted maps are the standard Age of Empires rules with a terrain custom designed, whereas generated maps every time you play are different because the mountain ranges and rivers are randomized. A tuning pack modifies the attributes of the units. For example, their health, their damage, their movement speed, etc. Generally, this is to make the game more balanced for competitive play. Unfortunately, the content editor is still rudimentary as far as completely custom units. You can't import your own 3D models or sounds. Finally, game mode changes the win conditions of a map. So instead of destroying the enemy's base to win the game, you could instead make it a survival mode where you just build towers and have endless monsters coming at you, and whoever survives the longest wins. The concept of mods is pretty cool because it gives us endless content to play, and if you want to learn coding, it's actually quite easy to get started. You'll notice these are all the community mods that people have made, and there's hundreds of pages, with each page having around 18 maps. So there's probably 2,000 maps here, which is pretty cool, but unfortunately you'll notice a lot of them have 1 star. So that tells us it's very easy to make a map, which is nice. It also means the quality control is pretty bad. So if you're looking for community maps to play, you're definitely going to want to sort by rating or popularity so you don't deal with just garbage. What's exciting to me about this is a different game I play called Warcraft 3 has this same concept, and the custom modding scene kept the game alive for decades, even after Blizzard stopped supporting the game. But Age of Empires 4 is pretty new, so we'll see how it goes. Today we'll be using the Age of Empires 4 content editor to make a map, and I'm going to design it after a popular map in Warcraft 3 called Run Panda Run. So let me start up the Warcraft map to explain the rules of the mode. On the bottom left here, you'll see a mini map, and it's obviously like a maze structure. I've got to walk around in a spiral formation until I get to the very center to win. And I control this little panda, so I just move him around, but I have to dodge all of these little minions, and they randomly move back and forth, so you want to be as far away as possible. So it's almost like dodgeball or something. And I think this is a great starting point for our first map in Age of Empires because both games are real-time strategy games, so it should be fairly easy to convert one map in Warcraft to Age of Empires. But I picked a fairly simple map because I'm just learning the editor. I don't know how powerful it is, and I don't want to bite off more than I can chew. So if you're a brand new coder, this will be perfect for you. So I'm just gonna run along here and see how long I can survive till I die. If I was playing multiplayer, when I die, it would leave a little body on the ground and one of my teammates could come pick me up. I think I will make the Age of Empires version multiplayer as well. This is like a boss. I can't kill him, I just need to keep running. So I guess you gotta be careful with the pathing, because if I accidentally click to the side here, like off the edge of the wall, it's gonna try to path me all the way there. So I'm gonna lose control of my character. So you wanna click close to yourself. So there's the little body that gets left. If someone walks on top of that, it resurrects. So I think instead, I'll have you just automatically resurrect at the beginning here. And while I had my character selected, you would have noticed at the bottom here some icons for items, and on the bottom right corner here, icons for abilities. Age of Empires has that concept as well. It's a little more rudimentary, but I might toy around with maybe an ability that gives you a speed boost or makes you invulnerable or something like that. So let's quit out of Warcraft and get into the content editor. When you first open the editor, it asks you to create a new mod, and I explained each of these before. My first inclination would be to do a game mode because I'm not really winning by destroying the enemy. However, I'm going to do crafted map because it has a tool that I like. I don't really want tuning pack because I'm not really modifying the units. And the strange thing about tuning packs is when you load any map in the game, for example, if I just do a skirmish, when I pick the map, separate from the map under game mode, I have tuning pack. So to me, tuning packs are a bit awkward because they're not tied directly to the map. So I could take any map created by one person and any tuning pack created by a different person and combine them together. And although the purpose of the tuning pack is to balance the units, if that map is customized for a specific scenario, that tuning pack is not really going to balance it correctly. And then I don't want to do generated because the idea there is you get to specify where the gold mines and stone deposits and berries are going to be located in general terms, like in proximity to each other, and then it randomizes it from there, which is fun. It makes the gameplay different each time. But for our situation where we're making a maze, there's not really a benefit to randomizing anything, I don't think. So we'll do the crafted map. Now the tool that I like is right here, this terrain layout tool. So I would recommend starting there if it's the first map you're making. And I'll call this Run Horsey Run instead of Run Panda Run. So this is that tool I was mentioning. You can essentially just draw the basics of what your map should look like, and it will randomize it just one time based on your drawing, and then make it a hard-coded map after that. So since we wanted a spiral structure in our game, I'm going to draw something like this, but I want the terrain to change with each loop through the maze, just so it's a little less boring. So each of these colors here, if you mouse over them, it'll pop up a tooltip which explains what it's for. So this bright green color says it's plains, whereas this brown says it's rolling hills. I don't think it matters a whole lot what I choose, so maybe I'll do a little section that's a lake, and a little section that's a mountain, and maybe a section that's a forest. And then the part I want them to walk on is this brown area. And to make it not too confusing, I think I'll have the pathways all stay brown, but you'll notice this first one is rolling hills, the next one is medium hills, the next one's plateau. So I think I can mix up between the different browns and it'll still feel okay to walk on, but it would be confusing if you're walking through a lake or through mountains. So those are really the borders. So maybe this top one will be the gentle hills, then the low rolling hills, then the medium hills. The colors are almost identical. You can't even tell I painted there, but I did. Then maybe a plateau, medium plateau, maybe some plains, classic plains, settlement plains, and back to the original gentle hills. I think I'm basically good at this point. So I would just click next for it to generate. But a few other things you can do under players. Right now I'm on player 1. I'll click right here on the top left corner to say that's where he starts. Now, because this is a multiplayer mode and everyone's allied, the goal is to have everyone get to the very end, right here in the middle. So ideally I'd want player 2 to start right next to him, but it won't allow that. So this really just gives you a basic setup, and it's designed for the real game where you would not want two enemies right next to each other on the same tile. So I'll have to modify the settings for each player in the more advanced settings of the editor itself. This is just a tool to get you started, and it doesn't have every option. In addition, where it says size here, I actually do want it to be micro so that it's a small map, because I don't want you to have to be scrolling around constantly to see the maze. But even though that says max of 2 players, I think I should be able to allow 8 players instead, because I think it's recommending having a gigantic map for 8 players. I don't think it's going to force it. And then I could change the biome if I wanted. The biome is kind of like the climate, like tropical or desert. That may have some small effects on which animals are roaming the countryside, which they call Gaia in this game, as well as the look of the trees and things. I'm not going to worry about that. I'll just leave it on the default. Rivers and river crossings are cool, but it has a very rudimentary system for water in this generator, whereas the main editor that we'll get to once we click next has more options. So for example, if I click add river, you'll notice I drew a river in the middle. It's red because that's considered an invalid river. I have to start actually from one edge of the screen and go to the other edge of the screen in order for it to be considered a valid river, which is strange to me. Why can't I just have a lake or a river in the middle of the map? So I don't really like this tool for making the rivers unless you know for sure you actually want it to cross your entire map. But you can make your river go diagonal, and if you click on add point, you could take an existing river and make it curve around. So it could be useful. And then of course river crossings you could have as well if you wanted a little bridge somewhere. Okay, I'm going to click next, and now we have our map. This is pretty cool when you think about it. You can see that this structure roughly matches what I told it to draw for me. I've got this little L-shaped ocean in the middle, and so if we had our players start on this corner, for example, they would walk up, over, down, and then they keep spiraling in until they get to the ending point. And so I think I'll make the ending point just right here, this little island. And one thing I'm a little concerned about is it generated a whole bunch of trees here. Those are going to be difficult obstacles to get through. I'm going to definitely want to thin that out, I think. But we've got a decent starting point. Okay, so on the left side, we have Asset Explorer. And I have it hidden, so you have to actually click on it to make it appear. If you hit this little pin, it'll make it always available. I prefer to have it hidden. And then same thing here on the right side with properties and playback. Playback, I would recommend you come in here and hit stop. Basically all this is doing is taking things like the rivers and rendering the actual waves. So if I hit play, you can see the waves are moving. Well, when I'm designing the map, I don't need that unless I'm specifically focusing on the visual appeal. If I'm just focusing on the general structure of the map and the gameplay, I don't need that. And turning that off is going to speed up your editor a little bit. Okay, so if I bring up the properties window and then I expand this generated, you can see, for example, starting positions. When I click off of it onto, for example, trees, it highlights all the trees in red that were generated. If I go back to the starting position, you'll see this icon that I can zoom in on. This is where player 1 is going to start, right here. And whatever I'm clicked on the right side, you'll see properties about it. So under transformation, I can move it. I could do that just by dragging it around, but you'll notice the numbers here are changing. So I could also change it directly in here. The transformation isn't critical unless you need an exact coordinate. It's probably easier just to drag it where you want. But then under the top section of properties, you can change all the attributes of what you have clicked on. So for example, it says right now this is player 1, so I could change it to player 2's starting position instead. So I mentioned earlier I want to have all 16 players start at the same spot. I think I want to clone this starting position, so I can right click and do copy, and then right click and do paste. Now I have 2 starting positions, and so I really want 16. Okay, now I have 16 just by copying and pasting. Now I'll start with the top one, make it player 1, go to the second one, make it player 2, and I'll just keep following through until I get to number 16. Okay, now I've got my last starting position. Next, inside the scenario, I'm going to expand the players and change some of these settings as well. And remember to save frequently, just in case the editor crashes, you don't want to lose your progress. So under players, if I click player 1, you'll notice the options are completely different than what I had underneath starting positions. So these options are context sensitive. It knows what type of unit I have clicked on. And the same would be true if I clicked on a tree, for example. Some of these objects are going to be typical units you would see in the game, like a scout, and others might be more code related where they don't necessarily have a visual, but they still impact the game and they still have options that can be changed here. So for example, clicking on player, there's not anything visual, but there's still settings specific to the player. So under team, I want everyone to be on the same team so that they do not fight each other. So I'll put team 1 instead of random, and I'll need to do that on all of these other players as well. So player 2 says status closed. I'll change it to open and then team 1. And I'll do that through all the 16 players. You'll notice as I'm marking it to open, then on the left side, they're no longer grayed out with a red slash through them. So even though I'm on a tiny map, which should not support 16 players, it is allowing me to do it. And if I decide later that this map is too small, there is a tool, I don't remember exactly where, maybe under scenario, I think it's this resize, where it will actually take my entire map and stretch it or shrink it based on my preferred size. So if I decide it actually is too small once I'm actually playing it, then I don't have to start all the way over. I could do that. Okay, last player. File, save. Just get in the habit of hitting Control S frequently. Now, you can also select multiple objects at the same time, either by dragging to highlight or by clicking one of them, holding the Control key on your keyboard and clicking the ones you want to highlight, or clicking the first or last one and holding Shift and clicking the other, and it will highlight everything in between. The benefit there is if they're all of the same type, you can change their values all at once. So rather than going through one player at a time and marking open team 1, I could have done all at once. You'll notice here when I'm clicked on player 1, under player, I can't change it, it's disabled, because that's like a hard-coded value that's not configurable, but it does say player 1. If I select both, it doesn't say anything there. So whenever you have multiple objects selected, the only values that will show are the ones that are identical between them, but you can still change the value even if it's missing. And finally, if I accidentally select something that's unrelated, so say I have all these players selected and I also grab this random tree, all of a sudden the properties window is empty because since they're different types, tree does not have the same properties that player has. And this teaches you kind of the basic concepts of object-oriented programming, even though it's all visual. You could think of this blueprint as a class, and each of these names on the left as the properties of the class. And so player one is a specific instance of the blueprint, and all the values on the right are the values of those properties within that player one instance. So it's kind of visual coding. Behind the scenes, it is actually setting those variables. So I'm going to highlight all 16 and say lock team to force them to always be allies. Okay, next, I think I will create all their scout units on the top left corner. And I may have to go into the script and tell it not to generate their typical starting units, because I don't want them to have a villager and a town hall and all of that. So let's just click on edit script and see what code it shows me. The file name for script is scar. That stands for scripting at Relic. Relic is the name of the company that designed Age of Empires 4. And this language is essentially Lua, L-U-A. So if you're gonna Google coding tutorials, you're probably not gonna find a whole bunch based on Scar until the Age of Empires editor becomes really popular. But if you search for Lua, you'll find a whole bunch because a lot of modding tools use Lua. So this import statement, it's just going to find this file in their game install and import a bunch of generic functions that are helpful for most maps. You don't have to import this. This is just a default script to get you started. So I'll just leave it alone since it shouldn't hurt anything. But any actual code that's executing, if it doesn't match what I want, I'll change it. So this is showing how to grab a player by executing this function, passing the index of the player and putting it into a variable. This is showing how I could change what age they're in. So in Civilization, you go from dark to feudal to castle and then imperial. With each age that you unlock, you gain new units and new buildings that are stronger. So I could delete this code since it's not going to be helpful in our map, but it's already commented out, so it's fine to leave. As I'm scrolling through here, pretty much all the code looks to be commented out. So I was hoping there would be something that said generate this many villagers and a town hall, because I don't want any of the 16 players to have a real civilization here. I just want them to have a scout. So that actually may be what this starting position does. And maybe I just delete all of these and don't give anyone a starting position. I'll have to experiment to see. I do know I want to create 16 scouts though. In order to get a unit to drag in, you go to the object browser here at the bottom. So I'll click this thumbtack so that it locks in place, but I'll drag it down so I can still see a lot of my map. And then along with the object browser is output and error list. Output is for debugging while you're actually playing the game. If you go to script attach, the editor will be connected to the game while it's running. And so you could add a breakpoint on a line of code, which lets you debug the code and step one line at a time as it's executing. But in addition, you can send messages to this output window for debugging purposes. The error list is if there is a syntax error in your code, it will tell you, because that will prevent the map from compiling and you won't be able to play it in the game. So under object browser, I could scroll through this folder structure, or I could just search if I know the name of the unit. Most of the objects in the game that you're familiar with are going to be under eBPS and SBPS. The E stands for entity and the S stands for squad. BPS is blueprints. You can think of a blueprint just like in construction with a house. It's the design before the house gets created. In coding, this would typically be a class, whereas an instance of a class called an object would be the actual house when it's built. It's a bit strange that Age of Empires has entities separated from squads, because you'll find similar units in both. For example, if I go into entity, races, English, under units, I have battering ram. But if I go into squads, races, English, I also have battering ram. So each unit in the game is actually defined by a combination of both the entity and the squad. The entity is the most basic attributes of the object, and entities are even used for buildings or trees, things that don't move, don't necessarily fight. So the entity is more the base, whereas the squad has more specific things that are related to units and combat. In addition, a squad is also an array in coding, which means a list or a group of items. So even one single unit is called a squad, but a group of units is also called a squad. And one thing squads do in Age of Empires is they have a specific formation during combat. So the units will try to move around to put the ranged units in the back, and the melee units in the front, for example. So we want to put 16 scouts at the starting position. I need to be careful where I grab the scout from. So if I just search for scout, I can't easily tell whether I'm looking at the entities or the squads. But if I choose the entity version, it will not be a full-blown unit because it will be missing its code related to formations and attacking. So I want to be careful to use the squad version. If I go to English, I can find a scout and I can drag him onto the screen. But under players, I did not lock them into the English race. It would be preferred to let them pick whichever race they wanted, but just for ease of use, I'm just going to drag the English one in, so all the player scouts will look the same. And this is because I'm doing it with drag and drop. If I were to do it in code, I could ask the game what race the player picked and make sure I generate the scout for that race. And it does get a little tricky with some units because not every civilization has the same units. Most of the units do exist across every civilization. They have a different graphic and slightly different attributes, but they're very similar. But there are a few units that are exclusive to one civilization. So maybe I'll change player 1 here under race to always be English, and then I'll copy that value to all the other players. So now they just can't choose a race. Next, I'm going to copy and paste the scout 15 times. So that way we have a separate scout for each player. And then on the properties on the right side, I'll change the owner for each one. So the first one is player 1, second one, player 2, and so forth. And now we have our last scout set to player 16. Just so they're not all in the exact same spot, maybe I'll just kind of drag them around so that they're all kind of next to each other. Rather than grabbing the individual arrows to only move them one direction, if you put your cursor right on the center of the square, it changes from pink to yellow. That will allow you to drag it in both directions, which is much easier. But first you need to highlight the unit that you want to move. Otherwise, if I try to select it by clicking on it, I might accidentally grab a tree or something else. So now I have my 16 scouts. They're not exactly aligned, but I think it's close enough. Now it's probably a good idea to test our map occasionally as we make progress so that if we do something stupid, we find out about it as early as possible. If we wait to code the entire map and something goes wrong, it might be hard to narrow down and troubleshoot what specifically happened. In order to do that, you open up the game and you go to mods, then my mods, and this will show you all the mods that you have installed, whether from the content editor or downloaded from the community. In my case, it's blank, and that's because first in the content editor, when you're ready to test, you need to click build mod, then it will show you a bunch of messages as it's compiling, and then you hit OK. There are a few annoying bugs with this process. First of all, there are two ways to install Age of Empires. If you own Xbox Games Pass or PC Games Pass, you can install Age of Empires for free from the Xbox app or the Windows Store app. However, you can also purchase the game directly from Steam. The two versions of the game are almost identical. However, Microsoft has a small amount of extra DRM, which stands for Digital Rights Management. Essentially, they're checking your license to ensure you own the game to prevent piracy. And Steam has this as well, but the Windows version is a little bit glitchy. For example, right now I have both Age of Empires the game and the content editor open simultaneously. The Microsoft version does not allow this, so you have to close the editor whenever you want to test it in the game, and then when you want to go back to editing, you have to close the game, go back to the editor. It's pretty annoying. There is a hack you can do to prevent this, so for any of you that have the PC Games Pass version that care about that, let me know in the comments and I'll explain how to do it. But in addition, the game itself actually reads all the mods at startup and locks all of the mod files. So even though we compiled with build, it's not going to show up in the game until we restart the game. So I'm going to quit out of the game and then relaunch it. The final annoying thing is it actually locks the files to the mod once you open the game. So because of that, if you want to make further edits to the mod, you can't really do that unless you restart the game in between tests. So you do want to code as much as possible in between each round of testing just to avoid constantly having to restart the game if possible. There are advanced debugging techniques to work around having to constantly restart the game. For example, I mentioned before under script attach, you could connect the editor to the game. With something like this, you could test out some of your Lua code on the fly and change it without restarting the game. But that's kind of an advanced topic. So now I'll go into my mods and you'll see my mod has been added here and it's turned on. So if I go to skirmish under play, then I can pick as my map this custom map that I've created. And so far it's working how we expect. We have 16 players. I don't really need an AI, so I'll figure out how to disable that in the future. And it is allowing me to pick the civilization I want, so I should change that to be locked. The team number is locked. I think it's fine that I can change the color. So let's start and see what happens. So first of all, these wind conditions we'll want to delete because our win condition is getting to the center of the map. Okay, so the scouts seem to have been created correctly, but I definitely don't want to start with a base or villagers. And then I think I do want to remove this fog of war so that I can see the entire map as I'm playing. So I'm just keeping a note in my head of changes that should be made. Let's check out how the pathing works. So there's definitely enough trees here that there's no way I can get through. I actually wonder, since I have a cliff here that runs along the whole side, if I should delete all these trees and have you start on the bottom corner of the map just to make the maze a little bit longer. But let's run through the rest of the maze and just see if it feels right without any monsters. So I think it's fine that there's a few random trees here and there to maybe mess up your pathing. I may want to get rid of the Gaia that are not wolves because it could be a little confusing to have sheep. The way these trees are set up, it's pretty dense. I don't feel like I could run through. Previously, I was wondering if I needed to draw a fence or intentionally edit the impasse map. It looks like I don't need to do that. I maybe should delete these sacred sites. It's interesting, even though I made this a micro map for only 2 players, it still feels quite large going through this maze. If I were to actually play this all the way through, I think it would take me a long time. I'm thinking if it's not possible to shrink the map smaller, I'll probably want to just make the horse significantly faster. So this amount of Gaia I think is about right. This was auto-generated, I didn't pick it. And it really should be something like wolves where I know it's going to attack me. And instead of them running away from me, they should be chasing me and I should be dodging. But that feels about right. I'll have to check if these were generated by code or if they're permanently placed on the map. I've made approximately 1 trip around the map and I've tried to look for shortcuts as much as possible. I haven't really found any. I think it'll be interesting to have, for example, a tiny little path here that you have to take because that could be a choke point you got to be careful of. For debugging purposes, I think I definitely want to make the horse faster. And with these wolves, I think I want to change them so that they kill you in 1 hit and then you resurrect at the starting point. And then also I want to make it so you can't attack. So let's see if this is really a dead end. It feels like it probably will be. Yep. So I think I need to open this up so that I can walk into this little island. Okay, that was a decent playtest. So I have some ideas of what I want to attempt to change next. So I'll quit out because if I were to make some changes and click build while the game is running, the files would be locked. So first of all, let's delete all these starting positions and save. And it looks like that created an error. So because I deleted those starting positions, there's an issue. So if I go into the templates and search for starting, it looks like the one I have is starting position shared territory, which is this cube. So I think I could swap it for one of these other cubes. You don't want to use the ones that have eyeballs for icons because it's the 3D model with nothing else connected. Because just for scenery's sake, you might want to drag in a building that you can't interact with just for cosmetic to give flavor to your map. I'll switch to the one that says no town center and see if that works better. Delete these. Drag the no town center in, copy it 16 times. I just realized I made a mistake. I'm going to undo copying this node town center. What I instead should have done, you'll notice if I click on just a single node town center, it has this blueprint. I can just copy this blueprint and then hit edit, undo until I have my 16 original territories back. I can highlight all of them and just paste in the blueprint that I want. And now all of them have changed to the new blueprint. The only risk with that is if you change something to a completely different type of object, some of the attributes that were set before may no longer be valid, so you would lose those values. But that would also be true if you drag in a brand new object from the browser. You're going to have to reset all the variables. Okay, I think that will fix my town centers. And then I wanted to lock the race. So there's a checkbox for that here. So I'll select all 16 players and now they have to be English. Next, I think I want to remove all these trees on the side and move all the starting positions down to the bottom. So the trees all are created under this generated section. So if I click on generated, you'll see tons of stuff highlighted in red, but that's going to be too cumbersome to deal with in this hierarchy. So instead, I'm just going to zoom in and select it with my mouse to delete. But I have to be a little careful because there's also this yellow border that tells you when you've left the bounds of the game. If I highlight that, it will let me delete it, which I do not want. And I don't think I need to be perfect. It's okay if there's a few random trees that are obstacles, as long as you can get through. Okay, I think that looks pretty good, but now it looks a little bit bare. So maybe I'll just grab a few random trees and just move them to make it less boring. And then I was curious here, for example, all of these deer, I really just want to make all the Gaia wolves. So the blueprint for that is Gaia huntable wolf. So I'll just look for anything that says deer and change it. I'll highlight all of them so I can change them simultaneously. And then I don't really want this deer minimap icon because you're actually supposed to avoid the wolves. I might later change that to be coded to auto-generate the wolves, but for now I think it's fine. I think I'll get rid of these trade posts, and I also wanted to get rid of these sacred sites. Let's go through the rest of these hierarchies to see if there are any other Gaia that need to be changed. Probably the easiest way to do that is to click Edit, Find, and under Property Name, say Blueprint, and under Value, say Gaia, and then make sure it's on Substring, and hit OK. So these are all wolves, but if I scroll down, I've got sheep and boars. So I'll select all these sheep and paste in the wolf as its blueprint, and I'll do the same thing on these boars. Delete the boar minimap icon, and then let's search one last time to see if there are any non-wolf Gaia. Yes, it looks like I missed 2 sheep. Okay, that should be good. I suspect I probably don't have nearly enough wolves, so I will probably drag in a bunch of wolves, or maybe even move some of the wolves around. And in the Warcraft version, the wolves just randomly run back and forth, but I'll experiment because if the AI for the wolf feels good enough to where they chase you a little bit, but not too much, maybe I'll just leave it with its current code. And there is this attribute, open attributes, which I'll show later, but that allows you to modify the units themselves. So I could change the wolf in how large of a radius it detects, for example, or how far it will chase. A couple of other things I wanted to change. I didn't like how these trees completely blocked me from getting through because I really want to get to this island to win. So I'll just delete a few random trees to make it payable. Okay, that seems okay. Next, I want to move all the scout to the bottom of the map. And you'll notice if I highlight all of them, then I can drag them together and they stay in that formation. Okay, I've got my scouts moved. Let's move my starting positions as well. Since there's no town center, I'm not sure how much it really matters, but I'm assuming this will determine where their camera shows on the screen at the start of the game. I'm seeing some win conditions. I'll just put it as sandbox, and then I will trigger a win when you get to the island at the center of the map. And then under win condition options, I'll click edit. So these drop downs are disabled until I hit the checkbox, but if I hit the checkbox and change it to revealed, I think that will remove the fog of war. Next, I want to change the movement speed of the scout, as well as change his hit points to 1. So if I go to attribute, open attributes, it takes a second to load. It acts like it's opening the content editor, which is already opened, which is confusing, but it's actually just opening another dialog. And this dialog is kind of like a giant XML editor for all of the data about all of the units. And you'll notice at the top it says eBPS, so I'm looking at entity blueprints right now. If I go to attributes now, previously the menu was very short. All it had was basically just open. Now it shows all of these different categories. So if I want to change the squad blueprints, instead of clicking eBPS, I could scroll down and find the squad BPS. So from SBPS, I go to races, English, find the scout, and I'll right click and say copy. And then I want to right click and say paste, but it won't let me. And that's because I'm inside of a crafted map and the attribute editor is only for tuning packs. So what I have to do is on the file menu at the top, I need to say run asset wizard and then click attribute mod, which says that it will create a tuning pack or attribute data that can be referenced within your mod. So I'll hit next and I'll just give it the same name as my map itself. And now you'll notice this new folder that got created. So if I clone the scout, it should be possible now. So right click copy, right click paste is still disabled, but if I scroll down to my mod, I can paste it there. Or I can simply click on the scout and say clone. You generally want to leave all of the defaults here. If you don't have your clone override the parent, it messes up the inheritance of the unit because it creates a brand new unit instead of just changing a few values of the existing unit. So you'd only want to do that in a completely custom game mode where you want to have completely brand new units. And the lock strings are translation data if someone's playing in a different language than English. Okay, so now that I've cloned it, you can see the object at the very bottom here. And this is kind of an odd interface. The render tab and my code editing tab are next to each other, but this attribute editor snapped to the left side and it's actually missing a bunch of the controls. I need to expand this to be able to see it, but that messes up my render window. So I actually want to drag this tab and put it next to the render and then drag this back. So that way I can still see my full screen render, but I can also switch to editing my units. I chose to use the attribute editor here. There are pros and cons to that. One issue is I'm specifically editing the English scout. So if I allowed players to pick a different race, I would have to edit all of the scouts. So it might make more sense to do it in code, but in our case, we'll just change the attribute directly in the editor. So I've got my scout English selected, and on the right side, there is a tree of all of the attributes that I can change. And extension is kind of like a class, but it's more of the concept in coding called a mix-in some languages, which is kind of like a coding template that other classes can use. In a purely object-oriented language, you would inherit from a base class, and that's where you would get your generic functionality. But that doesn't work well if you want plug and play features because you can only have a single line of inheritance. You can't inherit from two different classes. And so these extensions, which I mentioned are kind of like mix-in templates, you could have something like an ability, which is a button you click on the unit to perform an action. That can be a generic concept coded one time in the extension, and then each of the individual units can have that extension attached to them. So if I expand here, I can see which abilities the scout has enabled. Now, because there are so many extensions here, I don't necessarily know right off the bat where the movement speed or where the health is going to be located. So I can use the search bar and type health and see what comes up. So it says there's only one result, and it's this help text, which explains what the scout does. So it's a tooltip for the user in game. So although this text has the word health inside of it, it's really not what we're looking for. So what I need to do here is instead switch to the entity blueprint attribute editor instead of the squad. So I'll leave this one open in case I need it later, but I'll click on attribute EBPS. And again, I'll need to look for my English scout, right click clone, okay, and then select my version of the scout and open up the extensions. So here I'll search for health, and it looks like there's an extension for health. So instead of the hit points being 110, I want it to just be 1 so that it dies if it's ever attacked even one time by a wolf. Next, I want to search for speed, and it says there's 12 results. So I want to make sure I'm working on the correct property. So this speed scale threshold, just by the variable name, it sounds like it could be useful. But then when you look at the hierarchy, it's underneath animation. So that doesn't actually sound correct. Next search result. Okay, this is a moving extension. That sounds more promising. It looks like there are 4 different speed levels. I'll probably just change all 4 of them to one hard-coded value and see what happens. There's also a min, max, and default speed, which I can change as well. I'm not sure what would be a good value, but I think maybe 16, and then we can adjust this as we test. So I think we're almost finished. I probably want to add in a bunch more wolves. I've got a few areas here that have tons of wolves, but then I have a lot of areas that just have hardly any. And then finally, I want to create some kind of event that happens when the player reaches this spot on the map to cause the game to end. I think if I click on just one wolf and go into the properties window, under the transformation, I can click rescale, but I'm not really sure how to interact with it. When I switch between rotate and rescale, you'll see this little black square underneath it that switches to a black circle. The rotation works how I'd expect. I just grab the sphere and it rotates. But when I switch to scale, there doesn't seem to be anything I can click on to interact with it. So instead, let's go to attributes, EBPS, and let's search for the wolf in here. Okay, huntable wolf. Let's see if it has anything about size in here. The only one that maybe sounds right is entity scale. Let's check the squad as well. Search for wolf, search for scale. So this is just minimap scale. Size, nothing. Okay, I'm gonna assume it's under eBPS. So let's clone this wolf and then change its scale to 500. So it should be 5 times bigger. When I go into the render screen, that feels the same. Let's go back to 100. Okay, it's not noticeable to me. So I'm going to assume either I've changed the wrong property or the property doesn't take effect until runtime. Let's just add our win condition and then do some testing to figure out the last set of changes we need to make. In order to create our win condition, I need to go to Object Browser and search for scar. There's something called a scar marker. Remember that scar is essentially Relic's scripting language that's built off of Lua. A scar marker is a coordinate in the game. So if I drag it onto this island and give it a name of winner, then it will create a variable which I can code against. The type actually does not matter. It does not affect the gameplay or code at all. It's simply a categorization to help you as the coder remember what its purpose is. So I can really pick anything I want, but player destination kind of sounds like what I want. So I'll put player destination here as winner. I'll make another one here called respawn and give it type of player spawn. Next, I'm going to right click on my scar marker of winner and click add. These are subcomponents that are specific to scar markers. I'm going to make a proximity circle component and hit OK and give it a radius. I think about 10 is good. So you can see if you're close to the center of the island, it would count as winning. For my respawn, I don't really need a radius because I'm fine to use that exact coordinate. Whereas for winning, it would be very frustrating if they danced all around the spot and just couldn't quite find it. Next, I want to register an event against this marker. So I'll go into my code. You can click the scar file if you already have it open, or this icon for edit script. And because this is an event, it doesn't matter too much which function you put it inside of because the code isn't going to execute immediately. It's just registering a condition and it will execute your custom code once that condition is met. So I'll type event underscore enter proximity. And the first parameter is a function callback, which will happen when the unit enters that proximity. So I'll make a function called player winner, and that's what I want to use as my callback. The table data parameter is simply data that will get passed to my callback function. And a table is just an object in curly braces with variable names inside, similar to like a JSON object in JavaScript. So I could say, for example, player index equals 1 as my data. And then in my winner function, I can say that data is a parameter. This is the value that will get sent. The documentation is not perfect, so it's a little confusing what it wants by target when it says const target handle is the data type. And I think it's a generic term because it could be an entity or a squad, and a squad can be a single unit or an array of units. So for that reason, they use a strange generic term. I bet I could pass it any of the 3 data types and it would work. So I want to just send it a squad, which is an array of all of the scouts. But because they are different players, and because I'm choosing to pass which player arrived, then maybe I'll do a for loop and only pass the 1 scout. The require all, it looks to be a misspelling. Essentially, if I passed an array of scouts, it's saying, do all of them need to enter the marked location for the event to be triggered? Or can it be triggered as soon as one of them arrives? Next is the location that they need to get close to for the proximity event to trigger. Next is the range. And I think because I already defined the radius, then the range probably doesn't matter. And then the repeat is just if the event has already triggered once, should it continue to trigger? I'm not really sure why it has a trigger on enter Boolean variable because the function itself is called enter proximity and there's a separate function for exit proximity. So it seems like you would always have it to true. But we have a general idea of how the function probably works, so let's try it out. First, I need the scout itself. To do that, I'll first call player get all entities from type, and I'll pass player1 as the first parameter. For the second parameter, it says the unit type should come from the type extension on the entity. So let me go to the entity blueprint, look at Scout, look at its type extension, and it has a long list of potential unit types. The idea here is, for example, if I passed in military, it would give me all units that happen to have the word military in their unit type list. So I wouldn't have to say, give me spearmen and give me trebuchets and give me archers, because they're all classified as military. Whereas if I just say scout, probably nothing else is classified as a scout. So I can just pass in the word scout here and it should work. Now, technically, since the player only has one unit, which is a scout, I could just remove this from type, but I'll do it this way for now. And I'll do this inside of a for loop. So I'll say for player index equals 1,16 do end, and I'll tab this in. So this says the player index variable will start as 1, it will increment up to 16, and it will increment by 1 every time. So now instead of hard coding this to player 1, I can use that variable, and this code will execute 16 times, once for each value in this list. So I'll call my variable player instead of player1 and pass the player variable into get all entities from type. Then I'll put that into the scout variable. So now this enter proximity, where it's asking for a target, that will be my scout variable. Require all, in this case it doesn't matter because I only have one scout anyways. But if I made a squad that contained all 16 scouts and I passed them all into the same function, I'd probably put false because I don't need every player to get to the end to win. I just need that one player to get to the end because it's a team game. If anybody makes it, everybody wins. For the marker location, I'm going to use this winner variable, and it's a global variable. So if I just type winner, you'll see it right here in the autocomplete, and it has that marker icon. For the range, I don't really know what this value is for, so I'll just put 10, which was the radius I chose in the proximity circle. If that messes it up and it's somehow way larger than I expect, I'll change it. For repeat, I'm going to say false because once they've entered once, the game should end. And for on enter, I'll say true, but I really don't understand why it's even asking that since the event I'm registering is the enter proximity. Now inside of winner, I want to end the game. I'm not exactly sure what function would do that, but a lot of these mission underscore variables and function names seem related. So I'm going to try that. There's a complete and a fail. So I'm going to assume it's probably the complete. So that says ends a single player scenario with the victory. I'm not sure that that makes sense because we're not really in single player mode, but maybe it'll work. I'm kind of curious if I right click on this mission-o-matic.scar and say open document, if I read the code that Relic put into this base code, maybe there'll be examples that could be useful. The only function I'm finding that might make more sense is this mission-o-matic end mission, which has a true or false for a win. So instead of complete, I think I'll do that and say a win true. And I probably don't even need to pass a table of data since I'm just ending the game for everyone if anyone makes it. So maybe I'll just change this to null and not accept a parameter for the data. So we've changed quite a few things since we last tested. Let's try this out and see what happens. I'll do build. Now I'll open my game again. I'm a little nervous that the changes I made to the squad and entity are going to be registered as a tuning pack. So if I don't pick that tuning pack along with my crafted map, it won't work. So we'll have to experiment with that. Play, skirmish, map. Okay, I have my map here selected. Okay, I don't see a tuning pack. So if my units actually are fast like they're supposed to be, then I'll know the tuning pack worked without having to select it. So let's start. Okay, I like that it says sandbox instead of how it previously said you win by destroying the enemy. Play. Okay, it says fatal scar error execution paused. So I'm gonna hit escape and say restart. Yes, that will put me back into the loading screen. Now I want to go script attach. That should connect the editor to the game so I can debug it. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be working. And the reason for that is when I run the game from the start menu, by default, it doesn't have any extra command line options. But what I actually want is a version with extra settings, in particular the -dev command line. So all I've done is created a shortcut to the game, and inside of the shortcut, in the comment, it has the command line option. It's kind of a strange thing. The Windows Store and Xbox installers are very weird compared to Steam. Normally, target would be an executable instead of this weird code, and the command line options would go inside the target. So if you can't figure out how to set up your environment, just ask in the comments and I'll help you out. So if I run the game from this shortcut, it should put me in dev mode. So now if I go script attach, it should work. And you can see the icon for the game is flashing now. And under script, attach is now disabled, but detach is available. So it seems to have worked. Also, there's this new tab here called call stack. It's empty right now because I haven't actually started the game yet. So before I start it, I want to add a breakpoint in my scar file on the very first for loop, because this is the code that I've added since the error I got before was specifically talking about scar execution errors. Now if I start the game, as soon as the game loads, it should hit my breakpoint. Click play. Okay, the game seems to have frozen, but it hasn't said that it's crashed. So if I tab out, I can see I'm at my breakpoint. Now my call stack has data, but since my code's not very complicated, I don't really have any nested functions, so I'll just ignore the call stack. And although I have these 3 higher level functions, you'll notice there's no location for them. That's like internal game code. I can't step into that code or see how it works. But I should also be able to click on locals and globals to see the values of all of my variables. And also, if I go to script, step over, you can see that's F10. That will go 1 line at a time. So I'll hit F10 and I'm inside the for loop. And now my locals, which was empty before, has a single variable player index 1. So I know my for loop is working. Let's step one more. I expected to have a player variable show up in my locals, which I didn't. I wonder if it's under globals. Let me search player. Okay, it is right here. That bothers me a little bit that it's a global variable. I don't know if it'll hurt anything, but it really should be local. Let me step one more and see if the scout variable gets created. Okay, here's where it crashes. E group add, so the E stands for entity, attempted to add a squad entity, unit scout 1 English to group. This is a little confusing to me. I think it's essentially saying that I tried to add a squad to an entity array, and squads and entities are not interchangeable, but I don't feel like I said anything squad specific. But I guess a scout, because it's an actual unit with formations and attack and movement, it's really a squad, not an entity. An entity would be like a building or a stone quarry. So instead of player get all entities, I should have said something like player get all squads. So I'll hit OK. I'm kind of hoping the game hasn't fully crashed yet. Looks like it hasn't. So I need to fix the code, obviously, but I don't exactly know what the correct fix is. If I kill the game, change the code, and rebuild, what if it still is broken the next time? Well, it takes a couple of minutes to start up the game every time. That will get really annoying really quick. So because I am still attached to the debugger, I want to try inside of watch to see if I can execute any alternate versions of the code to figure out what works before I quit out of the game. So I'm going to start changing the code just to get the autocomplete to show, but I can't save because it'll mess up what's currently executing. There's this util get squads by blueprint. There's also world get all squads and world get all squads of type. I think any of those might work. Maybe I'll just do the world version. For the S group ID, I think I need to create a squad group, but for the type, I can still pass scout, I believe. So if I type S group, there is a create function, and I think I want to do create if not found, just so it doesn't crash, and I'll call it scouts. And I think I may not actually need this for loop, because if I move this code up, and just to make sure this is unique, maybe I'll call it horsies, since that's the name of my game. So I'll put that into a horsies variable, and then when the world get all squads is called, it will find all the scouts in the game of any player and put them into this horsies group. So that's beneficial because this enter proximity, I think instead of passing a single scout unit, I can pass all of the horsies, all 16 players. But if I'm going to do that, instead of using require all as true, I need to say false, because say one player disconnects or they die and they just give up. I don't want the rest of the players to not be able to win because one person didn't make it to the middle. So I don't think I even need this for loop code at all. And I don't know if I really need this player variable. I'll just delete that and this for loop. But the real question is, do these two lines of code I wrote actually work? So let's try copying this S group, create if not found horses, into the watch. Okay, the value is a random memory address and the type says table S group. So it seems to have created correctly. Now, because I'm in the watch window, I can't actually create it as a local variable, but that's okay because this is called create if not found. So if it already exists, it will just return the existing one. So here, when I call world get all squads of type, instead of passing it horses, when I'm using the watch window, I'll just pass it this create if not found. First, let's expand this table. So it says 0 spawned, 0 despawned. So I know it's an empty group. So now in the watch window, let's paste world get all squads of type, create if not found horses, scout, enter. Okay, now what's strange is it says value 16, but this expanded group here still says 0 spawn, 0 despawn total. I think if I right click on it and say refresh, okay, perfect. Now it says 16 spawned. When the code's actually executing normally, that's not an issue. It's just the nature of the watch window. So I'm pretty confident these two lines of code are going to work great. I'm still not 100% sure on the enter proximity because we weren't able to step that far into the code. And so I'm also not sure about this end mission or if the tuning pack worked correctly either. But that's okay. I think let's just script detach. Now we'll go back to the game and we'll see that we're kind of in a frozen state. And I want to just like restart or quit the match and then retest. But unfortunately, as the game's running right now, if I hit build, even though it'll say that it compiled just fine, there's no errors anywhere. As soon as I hit OK, it says error copying. So this SGA file is the final compiled map, and it's saying that the game has it locked. So unfortunately, you do have to actually kill the game. You can keep the editor open, but the game has to be killed before you can hit build again. And that's why, just to save time, you really want to learn how to debug well so that you're confident the next time it's going to work. So let's start up the game again. I'll still use the dev command line option so that in case it doesn't work, I can attach to the debugger. Okay, skirmish, pick my map and hit start. I'm not going to bother to attach the debugger until I see if it crashes or not. I don't really need to step through the code if it works fine. Okay, it still crashed. Invalid number of arguments, expected 7, received 8 in mission setup players line 20. So I'll hit OK and I'll hit escape and do restart. Yes, so that'll reload the game. So that must have been this enter proximity function because that's line 20. And we already tested these first two lines and expect that they work. So it's saying I gave too many parameters, which is a bit strange. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's saying I sent 8 and it only wanted 7. Let's read the description. Callback, data, target, require all, location, range, repeat, trigger. That's 8. I think the documentation's incorrect here. I feel like I passed everything it asked for. So let's try to attach again, and we've got a breakpoint. Now when I click play, it should pause, and I tab out. I can see I definitely got to this line of code that I was expecting, but I don't quite understand why it thinks I sent the wrong number of parameters. I think I'll just do some trial and error. So if I copy this line and paste the whole thing into the watch, I should get that exception, but it won't crash the game, so I can try again with different parameters. So for example, I thought it was strange that it was saying trigger on enter was a Boolean at the end because I'm already in the enter proximity function. So I wonder, what if the documentation is just incorrect and that variable is not even needed? That's just a guess. And I already know it wants 7 parameters and not 8. So I have to remove something. So let's just try that. I'll remove the very last Boolean. Let's paste in both so we can see them side by side. The one says invalid number of arguments, 7, expected, received 8. The second time when I removed that last Boolean, it says parameter 2 is invalid. It expects a tagged union shared and it received a nil. Okay, so essentially I think it's saying that this data variable that I passed for null, it needs to have that so that it can pass it to the event handler. And it's saying it needs to be of data type tagged union shared. Well, what is a tagged union shared? I don't even know. Obviously it liked the first parameter I sent. It'd be nice if I could look through some of this example code like in Mission Nomadic to find event enter proximity if there's an example somewhere. And maybe I can, like under leader.scar, if I right click and say open, if I open all of these different files, maybe I can find an example. But first, let's just go to the globals and see if I can find any variables that say tagged union shared as their type. So if I just search for the word tagged under globals, it's obviously not searching the type, but there are 3 function names that are interesting because all 3 talk about a tagged unit. Now, I don't know that a tagged union shared is the same as a tagged unit, but let's try that. Okay, that seems to have worked pretty well. Now it says invalid parameter 7. It wanted a table, but it got a Boolean. So that tells me that it's okay with the group being the second parameter, and it's actually okay with the next 4 variables. It's just the very last one, the true, that it didn't like. And if it wants it to be a table, I'll just assume that's where it wants the empty data object that's going to go into the player winner event handler. So let's try that. Okay, I think it worked because this time it just returned a value 7. That's kind of a strange value to return, but I'm just going to assume that means it registered the event handler. So this is something annoying about Lua is it's an interpreted language, not a compiled language. And so you don't get error messages while you're typing the code if your code is wrong. You have to debug it at runtime if it's wrong. And essentially the documentation given to us by Relic is wrong. And that's probably because they probably modify the code every time they do a patch to the game. And now the documentation's outdated. But that's okay, we were able to work through it. So let's detach our debugger, quit out of the game, start up the game again. Oops, I forgot to click build first. Okay, it's compiled. Now I can start up the game. And hopefully this time we don't get any errors. Click play, and hopefully the SCAR does not crash. Looking good so far. My camera started at this random spot in the middle instead of at the bottom where my scout is. And I think I maybe should give better instructions to the player. It may not be obvious what they're supposed to do. I don't feel like my horse is any faster than before, so I feel like the tuning pack maybe did not work. The fog of war does look correct though. The wolves also do not look big. My scout also has 110 health. So a bunch of things that are off there. So I could run all the way to the center here to see if at least my trigger event worked, but I'd rather test once I have a really fast horse. Okay, I think I figured out what I'm doing wrong. I made a mistake when I went into File, Run Asset Wizard, and I chose to create a tuning pack. The option's not here right now because I already did it. So I'm going to create a new mod temporarily to show you the option I chose wrong, but then I'll come back in here and fix it. I don't want to start my map all the way over, so I'll fix it by editing the files in the Asset Explorer directly. But essentially, it asked me if the tuning pack was part of my crafted map or if it should override the base game files. I chose to make it part of the crafted map. However, that setting should not even exist in the editor because it does not work. Let me show you what I mean. When I go back into the game and click mods, my mod type says crafted map. That actually needs to say bundle because it needs to have both a crafted map and a tuning pack in the same mod. The reason for that is if I click play, single player, skirmish, create game, when I choose my map, under game mode, there should be a drop down here for tuning pack where I can select the tuning pack that's part of my crafted map. But because I chose the broken option, which is an internal tuning pack, there's no way to select it, and the game never actually loads the data, so it never takes effect. By making it an external tuning pack, I can pick it in this drop down and it'll work perfectly. I feel like this is a awkward experience that Relic should probably fix because my tuning pack is very specific to my map, so I don't want them to ever select none. And in addition, I don't want anyone to play a different map and choose my tuning pack because it's not going to be helpful for their map. But it's not too bad and it works. So what I need to do is quit out of the game, and in the editor under Asset Explorer, if I expand the folders, you'll see under attrib for attributes, that's the tuning pack. There is an XML file for generic settings about the whole tuning pack, and then there's individual XML files for each unit I've overridden. If I right click on the main tuning pack XML and do open containing folder, then if I open this with Notepad, you'll see there is a setting override instances false. If it's false, it's essentially creating brand new units instead of modifying the existing civilizations units. And that actually would be a good thing, except that it also makes it so that tuning pack can never be loaded. So it's not possible to use those brand new units. So I need to change this to true to fix the issue, but I can't save it right now because the editor is still open. And if I save the file, the editor will crash. I need to close the editor first. But there's a couple of other changes I also need to make. If I double click any of these unit XML files, it will take me to the attribute editor under squad blueprints or entity blueprints. You'll notice there is a PBG ID for each unit. That stands for property bag group ID. A property bag is basically a list of key value pairs. And so this ID is a unique identifier for all of the settings inside here. Each unit needs to have a unique ID. The issue here is this is my custom version of the Scout. And if I go into races, English, Scout, you'll notice the ID is different. 166412 instead of 166418. If the unit is overriding the original unit, the IDs should be the same. Because the ID is different, it's actually a brand new unit. But if I go into the object browser, all of these blueprints are only built-in blueprints. I can't use my new custom unit to drag it into the render screen. And also, I can't click on an item in the scenario tree, go to properties, and switch its blueprint because custom units do not show here. The only way to use custom units is in the SCAR file itself. You can use the ID with functions like BP for blueprint underscore get by PBG ID. Something like that would allow you to access your custom unit. However, like I mentioned before, an internal tuning pack is never loaded, so you'll just get an exception. If it's an external tuning pack, you can use your custom units. In my case, I do actually want to override the base Scout because a completely custom unit requires extra effort and it's not necessary in my case. So I want to change this 418 in my custom unit to match the 412 of the original unit. And when I right clicked to clone the original unit, it should have kept the original ID. It would have done that if my tuning pack was configured as an external tuning pack instead of part of the crafted map. So I have two options. I could either edit all three of these XML files and put in the correct ID, or since I didn't really change too many values, I'll probably just delete them and reclone them. So let's fix this. Delete squad Scout, delete entity Scout, and delete the wolf. Save, close. Now I can open my XML file in Notepad and make the final change of override instances true. Let's open up the editor again, and I'll quickly show you the dialog I screwed up earlier before I load my mod. So if I click create new mod, if I just do a tuning pack and hit next, there's no extra setting here. But if instead I hit back and go to crafted map next, then after my crafted map gets started, I can do file, run asset wizard, and choose attribute mod, which is a tuning pack. Then next, you'll notice here it asks me, should my attribute data be for this mod only, or should it replace the base game data? Again, I don't know why this top option exists. That's what I chose the first time. It does not work. Don't choose it. Always choose this second one. And that will classify your mod as a bundle instead of a crafted map, because it will contain both a crafted map and a tuning pack. And then when they play your map, they can choose your tuning pack to go along with it. So let's go back to our mod. That should be fixed since we overrode that selection directly in the XML file to fix my mistake. Okay, now I can clone my units that I deleted before. Squad, English, Scout, right click, clone. Okay, you'll notice the ID here is 412 and the original ID is also 412. So they're identical. So any values I set in my cloned Scout will override the original. Let's do the same for the wolf. Clone, okay. Then let's switch to entities. Wolf, clone, okay. And Scout 1 English, clone, okay. Now I can set my properties again. So I want to change the speed of the Scout, and I can do that under the moving extension, and I think I'll do 16. Okay. I also want to change the hit points. I can do that under the health extension, hit points. I'll just set it to 1. So if it gets attacked at all by a wolf, it's dead. Next, under the wolf, I want to make it really big. I'll search for scale, and I found this entity scale. I think that's the correct value to change. So I'll set it to 1000. Now, unfortunately, the tuning pack does not load in the editor itself. So when I click to render, the wolves are still going to be normal size. There may be a way to change that, but I'm not sure. So we'll just test it out in the actual game. One other way I could have changed the size is if I go into transformation, you'll notice there's this scale button. It doesn't work. And the reason why is because the wolf is using a squad blueprint, and that's necessary because the squad has the extensions for the wolf's behavior. The fact that it will automatically attack the scout when it walks past and chase them, etc. The entity blueprint is what controls the actual visual, and so the scale button does not work from here. If instead I went to the object browser and searched for wolf, if I grab the visual version of the wolf, which is the entity, instead of the squad version, then I could scale it. So let's just do that as an example. Drag that in, then click scale. You'll notice this extra line that shows up. I can drag it to be as big or small as I want. Unfortunately, that's not going to be helpful because then I'll have to code the behavior of the wolf from scratch, which I don't want to do. So it's much easier to change it in the attribute editor instead of this transformation tool. Okay, one last thing I need to change is if I go to scenario and scroll down to this tuning pack mod GUID, I need to paste in the GUID of my mod so that it automatically selects this tuning pack. So if I click edit, copy mod GUID, I can paste it in here. So let's save and build. Now let's launch the game, and I think it will work this time. Okay, let's click mods, my mods. You'll notice my map now says bundle instead of crafted map. Then if I go back to play, single player, skirmish, create, if I pick my map, under game mode, the tuning pack is automatically selected and it has the identical name as my map. So the one downside to this is the host could break my map if they switch this to none before they started. But since we've automatically selected it, I think that's unlikely, so it's not a big deal. Similarly, under map state, we've automatically selected revealed. If they change to explored or concealed, it would keep the fog of war in the game. I guess with either option, the game will still work, it just won't be how I intended it. Without the tuning pack, the scout will run slowly and the wolves will be small. With the fog of war enabled, it will actually make the game harder because you might not see that a wolf is right next to you. So it's probably fine. If I really did not want the user to override the value, I could instead disable the fog of war in my Lua script instead of just defaulting the option in this game creation lobby. But I think as long as the defaults are set, it should be fine. So let's start the game and see what happens. This wolf is kind of weird. When I select it, the circle around it is huge, but the model itself is small. That's a bit strange. Let me go to my scout. Okay, the hit point is set to 1, and the movement speed, I'm not sure what the default is, but 4 tiles per second seems like a lot. Let's try to run around. Yeah, that's definitely faster than normal. And I think it feels like a decent speed. I'm okay with that. So definitely on this first corridor, I need to add more wolves because it's kind of boring if there's no obstacles to avoid. So I guess I'll need to debug why the wolves are not working. They are small and this should be big. Oh, what was that? The wolf just instantly got huge. Okay, I was not expecting that. My heart jumped about 100 times a second. I actually think that's kind of cool. Maybe I'm gonna leave it like that just to scare the player. So there must be some kind of bug where, I don't know. It's like it loaded the initial tuning pack before it created the wolves, and then afterwards loaded the overridden tuning pack. I don't know. I probably could fix that if I instead create the wolves in script so that it happens after the game is fully loaded, something like that. But I don't think I'm gonna worry about it. It's kind of fun. And also, it seems off. Normally the wolves are supposed to chase you, and right now they're not acting like they're wanting to chase me. So I'll need to fix that as well. But the idea here is I want to just run past. Okay, that guy actually is chasing me a little bit, but he's not very fast. Like, even though he's right next to me, he can't attack me for some reason because I'm not quite close enough to him. And then I just get a little bit away from him and he instantly leaves me alone. So that's surprising. So I'll need to fix that. I want to test this island to make sure I actually win the game when I get there. And in addition, since I just died, I want my unit to respawn here at the beginning when that happens. So a few improvements to make, but the basic concepts seem to be working. So let's quit out and fix those last few pieces. I think the first thing is I want to move the wolves around. Right here I have way too many, and in other places I have hardly any. So let's just randomly grab a few, and then on the transformation move, I'll just pick a new spot. I don't think it matters too much where I put it. I can balance it later if I need to, but I think I'll just do it kind of random. I wish I could visually see how big they are in the editor because it's hard to know how many is a good number. But I'm thinking maybe I want clusters of 2 or 3 at the most, and to otherwise have them more spread out. And I kind of like the idea of having them kind of hidden underneath these like trees where there's a choke point so that they're harder to avoid. Honestly, I've moved a bunch of them around, but I feel like there's still just too many overall on this one section. So maybe I'll just delete a few of them. I want it to be a little hard and scary, but not impossible. Okay, I think that's probably good. I'll have to do another play test to see. So let's see if I can fix the fact that they're being too passive. Under Entity Blueprints, with my cloned version of the wolf, I'm going to search for combat. And you'll notice under the combat extension, there are these scan intervals. That's how often it's going to try to find a new target. And I'm wondering if there's something causing it to think that I'm an invalid target too quickly, maybe because I'm running so fast that I'm not staying within its range long enough. So let's change some of these values. First of all, this interval with a valid target, that's how often in seconds it's going to keep rechecking if I'm a valid target. Right now, it's every 2 seconds. I think I'm going to change that to 0 so that it's every frame. This could cause a performance issue, but I just want to see if it even fixes the problem at all. But because it's with valid target, it's only going to scan for me after it's first acquired me the first time. So it's not like every wolf is going to be looking for me, just the one. And honestly, this map should be very simple anyways, as far as the script performance, because we don't have giant battles happening. So I'll change this second interval to 0 as well. And then for an invalid target, that's if the wolf does not have anyone to attack, how often it should look for someone to attack. I think I'll change this to 0.25. So let's do similar values here, 0.25 and 0, and 0.25, 0, 0. Now this frequent scan radius, that's how big of an area it's going to be searching. And it's only running the frequent scan if it has a valid target. So I don't think it should be an issue to do this frequent scanning. And in fact, it even says it's necessary for melee units, which the wolf is. I don't know what units this radius is in, but I'll just say 1,000 and see what happens. Okay, in addition, there's this idle targeting section. So let's increase its range as well. And the fact that this is only 15 makes me think that the 1,000 I chose is too big. So let's change this to 100. And then on this idle range, instead of 15, let's do 150. Since we essentially made the model scale 10 times larger than normal, we're increasing the range by 10 times as well. I don't know for sure if this will fix it, but I'm hoping. Next, let's fix the camera. So in my SCAR file under mission start, let's search for camera functions. It looks like there is a move to command. So let's use that. And first it wants a position, which it says it can accept a marker. So let's use this respawn marker where all the scouts are. Respawn. Pan is a Boolean and pan rate is a float. I think I just want it to be instant. So I'll say false and 0 for the rate. I don't think the rate matters since I told it not to pan. Okay, keep locked. I want false because I want them to move the camera after it's moved. And reset to default. I'm not entirely sure what the default camera is, so I'll just say false to be safe. I think that will fix it. If I wanted some examples on how this move function should be used, I mentioned earlier that by going to the top of the file, you have this missionomatic.scar file. If you right click and say open document, it will give you all of the code. You can also use the command Control-Shift-G. What I chose to do, this took a little bit of time, but I think it was worth it, is I hit Control-Shift-F for find in files, and I searched for import in all open documents, find all. Then I just double clicked each of these lines and hit Control-Shift-G to cause that next SCAR file to open. And I just did that a whole bunch of times until I had opened every SCAR file. And that seems a little strange. The idea here is I want a copy of all of these files so that I can search them in the future. If I right click on a file and do open containing folder, you'll notice it's actually in my temp directory. This is strange because I would have expected it to be in the file system already. So this is actually a file that's embedded inside the game itself, and I've researched it, but I'm not sure how to extract it. So by doing the search and the Control-Shift-G, I was able to get all the SCAR files from the Mission-O-Matic and then copy them out of the temp folder. And I put them into this Age of Empires 4 decompilation folder. So inside of Mission-O-Matic, I have all these SCAR files. Now, for general coding, I like to use Visual Studio Code, and it has a search icon that can search any folder for a specific term. So anytime I want to do research on something that I'm not sure how to code, I can search the existing missions in the game and see how they did it. For example, by searching for camera, I click the first result, and I have a whole bunch of examples of how to use the camera that the other missions are using. Right now I'm only searching SCAR files, but I've actually decompiled a bunch of other files as well. So I can search pretty much anything in the game or the editor. So there's two other tools I used for that. One is called JetBrains.peek, and it is a decompiler for Microsoft.NET programming languages like C#. So if I go to my Xbox games install folder for Age of Empires, and inside of content, search for DLLs and executables, I can drag them in, and .peek will actually decompile all the code. This won't work if it was compiled with C++. It has to specifically be a .NET language. But this is the actual editor itself, and you can see this app class. When I double click it, it shows me all of the code. It won't be 100% identical to the original, but it will be close as long as they have not obfuscated it, which is them intentionally scrambling the variable names at compile time. And even if it is obfuscated, you can still read the code okay. But in this case, it's not, so it's quite easy to read. And I can right click on this and say export, and it'll save all of the decompiled files to my hard drive. So I have all of that in my decompilation folder under Essence Editor. But in addition, the SGA file format is a compiled mod, and there are a bunch of built-in mods for the editor and for the game itself. For example, for custom campaigns. So there's a tool on GitHub called AoE and Essence is the code name for the editor that Relic created, both for Age of Empires as well as for their other games like Company of Heroes. But this tool was created by a member of the modding community, and if you go to releases, you can download the compiled version of this tool, which I have here, and the executable allows you to open an SGA file. For example, in my decompilation SGA art, I have textures that are part of the game and probably icons and 3D models as well. If instead of picking an art SGA, I had picked one of the campaign maps, I would have a tuning pack, etc. So I have opened up all of the SGA files that come with the game and also extracted them to this Age of Empires decompilation folder. So I can very quickly search all of this for examples of how to code whatever I need to. If you're interested in opening up the base game files, you would just go to your Xbox Games Age of Empires content folder if you have Xbox Games Pass, but it would be similar if you have Steam, and then just search for *SGA in this folder, and you'll find all of these files to view. Okay, so in case changing the camera the way I did is not successful, I can quickly search and find examples for how to do it. And the reason I went to all that effort is I got stuck earlier coding this event enter proximity function because the documentation is actually incorrect. Finally, if you want to find the documentation easier, it's as simple as going to script documentation and it will open it directly off your hard drive. You can also go to help, view help, and that takes you to the mod workshop. Both of these resources are valuable. Let's compile our mod and retest to see if the changes we made are working. Open the game, play again skirmish. That will automatically pick the map and options I had from before. Click start. Okay, here's my horse. So the main two things I want to test is, are the wolves more aggressive? And does it feel more fair in terms of difficulty, where there are not too many in one spot that I can't get past, but also that there are not any boring spots with nothing to dodge at all. And I'm going to try not to get scared this time when the wolf instantly gets big. Yeah, that still scared me. Okay, he definitely seems to be chasing me a lot more than he was before. So he did stop after a minute though. Okay, that surprisingly, first try, it actually is better. I don't know that it's perfect. I feel like maybe I need to increase his movement speed so he can chase me a little bit faster. He seems like he runs really slowly. Back to the entity blueprint under wolf. I'm honestly surprised that some of these combat attributes were in the entity, I would have expected it under squad. I wonder if that's because it's Gaia, meaning animals, instead of a civilization that you're supposed to control. Because I think it's supposed to be that the entity is the 3D model and the squad is the combat. I'm wondering if Relic doesn't always follow that rule. Anyways, let's increase these ranges. Instead of 10 times larger with 100 and 150 that we used before, let's make it maybe 250. And actually the idle targeting doesn't allow any higher than 100. In addition, let's see if we can increase its movement speed. So it has the same speed level options that my scout had. I don't think we want it to be as fast as the scout so that you can still dodge it, but I think it should be able to chase a little bit better. So the scout has 16, let's try 8 for the wolf. Again, when there are a whole bunch of different settings here, I understand the concept of different movement speeds in case it's, for example, a vehicle that can accelerate, but I'm assuming that's not actually enabled for these type of units. So I don't know which of the values is actually in use. And so that's why I'm just changing them all. Okay, rebuild our mod. Now, if you have the Steam version, you can also click build and launch, but the Xbox Games Pass version gets confused on how to start up the game. So you have to start it up by hand. Launching the game, play again skirmish, start game. Okay, hopefully the wolves will chase me a little bit better, but also hopefully, I know this is gonna get big. I kinda, okay, yeah, it's definitely chasing me a lot better now. That scared me. So this is actually kind of fun. I guess I forgot I still need to code the resurrect feature. Oh, I was not expecting that guy to appear out of nowhere. I feel like I'm probably going to end up dying before I get to the end of the map, which is the whole point. It should be difficult, so it's fine. But for testing purposes, I need to get to the end. Did I just die? I died. For testing purposes, I need to get to the end just so I know if the island trigger for winning works. And also, I need to get through so I can see if the number of wolves is good. This still feels like kind of a lot of wolves here. Maybe I need to delete a few. Okay, I've deleted about half of them on these last two paths, so hopefully that should be a bit better. So let's make our scout automatically resurrect. In my scar file, in the setup player function, it doesn't matter where I put this, but I want to just create an event for when my scout dies, and then I will resurrect it and move it to the start, as well as move the camera to the start. So let's search for an event when a unit dies. It looks like there's one called event death. So first it wants a callback. So instead of player winner, I'll make it player died, or maybe even scout died. I don't know if I need any data yet, but I probably want the actual unit which died. So that's my callback. Next is the entity group ID, which I'm hoping I can use this horses, but that is a squad group rather than an entity group. I know sometimes they're interchangeable and sometimes they're not, so I'll just try it. Next, it wants all units or any member or any squad. I think I just want to know if any member dies, but I don't know what data type it's wanting. I'm assuming this is an enum and any member is the value inside of that enum. Let's try mousing over the event death and see if it has any better documentation. Doesn't really look like it. Let's try typing any member. Okay, there's no any member, but there is any entity. I'm gonna hope that's it. But again, I can take this event death, search for it in Visual Studio Code in my decompilation and see if it finds anything. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have found anything, so I think I'm stuck just figuring this one out on my own. It's possible there are similar events that I could have used instead. Maybe if I search for any entity, I could find examples of that. But let's keep going. Next, it wants repeat. For that, I want true, because even after the event is triggered one time, I want it to still monitor for other scouts to die. And then require all entities dead, I want false. That seems kind of redundant because I've already said any entity rather than all units. So kind of awkward. And finally, a table of data. So the issue here is the horses group is all the scouts for any player. Ideally, I'd like to pass in the specific scout that died, but for now, I'll just leave it empty and I'll add a breakpoint here to see if my event is even executing and if I've registered the event correctly. And then I need to resurrect the unit. So I have both an E group respawn and an S group respawn. Since my horses was created with S group. Let's try that one. S group respawn horses. And the nice thing is it says it will only respawn the despawned squads in a group, but I don't want them to respawn at their current location. And this horses group contains both the dead and the alive. So first I need to find out which ones are dead. So there is a method S group get despawned at, which needs a group and an integer. So if I pass in my horses group and the number 1, it will find me the dead horse. Just in case more than one died simultaneously, then I think I'll do this in a loop. And this variable horses, I will make it local and paste it into my event handler as well, because the create if not found will just return the group if it already exists. So in order to loop over this, I first need a count of how many have been despawned from the horses group. And I'll put that into a count variable. Then I'll make my for loop, which goes from 1 to that count. And instead of grabbing just the first despawned unit, I'll use my incrementing variable from my for loop so that it happens once for each dead unit. In addition, I'll have an S group just like horses, but instead for the dead ones. And each time I get a unit, I'll store it into a local variable and then add it to this dead horses group with the S group underscore add function. I'll pass in my group and my unit, but because this event can execute multiple times, as soon as my code has executed, the horses should be revived. So when I get this group each time, I want to first clear it with S group underscore clear. So that will make sure it's empty each round. So now I have my group, it's cleared. Then I loop through how many dead units I have and add them all to the group. Finally, I want to respawn all of them, and I want to set the position of all of them to my respawn coordinate. And you have to pass 2 positions. The first is where to stand, and the second is which direction to be looking. I don't care which direction they look, so I'll just send the same position for both, which will just kind of give it a random direction to look. Okay, I have no idea if this will work or not, but I'm hopeful. So I'll remove my breakpoints for now and run the code. If it fails, which I suspect it will, then I'll add the breakpoints again and debug it. Let's build it and open the game. Play again skirmish, start game. I just realized I forgot to move the camera to the position of the new unit when it respawns, so I should probably do that as well. And something confusing is this camera function did not ask me which player, so I feel like every player will have their camera moved to that position. There should be player-specific cameras that I can look for. I'll need to research that. But first, let's see if I actually respawn. I'm surprised the code didn't just instantly crash, so it at least compiled. I'm gonna die on purpose. Okay, I did die for sure. I do not see any new scout here. So let's do script attach. And remember that will only work if we launch the game with the -dev parameter. So let's add a breakpoint to when the callback function executed. And then we'll restart the map in game. Okay, running up to my wolf. It killed me, but no callback happened. So let's run it again, but execute this event in the watch window and maybe execute a few alternatives to it, like passing entities instead of squads and different parameters. So restart, the breakpoint should hit as soon as the map loads, and I'll paste this into the watch. Okay, it returned the number 8, which the last time we debugged events with this enter proximity, it also gave a number, which makes me think it was registered, but obviously it's not working. So let's see what alternative parameters I could have sent. It does bother me that it wants an E group and I sent it a S group, but instead of any entity, I should try any member or any squad. I don't think I could find an any member variable, but there is an any squad, and that would make more sense since I'm using a S group. So that's one alternative I want to test. So let's copy this version that uses any squad and undo all our code changes. You can tell when there's an asterisk in the file tab that there are unsaved changes. So as I click undo, it should eventually remove the star once I get back to the original. Okay, then I'll go into the watch, paste in the alternate version. It gives me a number 9, so it has registered the event a second time with my new parameters. And then Now I'll die on purpose and see if my function gets called. It's beneficial to do it this way rather than changing the code and recompiling, because then I don't have to close the game and reopen it. So it's just a little faster for testing, especially if I have no clue what's wrong and I might have to change a lot of different things with trial and error. Okay, script run, go back to the game, find my horse, and suicide. Okay, this looks very promising. The game instantly froze when I died. So that means I probably hit a breakpoint. I'll tab out to my editor, and here's my breakpoint. So that's great news. So I know I need to change this any entity to any squad. Let's step through this code one line at a time and just see how it works. F10 to skip to the next line. I'll open my locals tab so we can see my variables. Inside of horses, this actually looks promising. It says I have 15 spawned, 1 despawned. So that means dying actually did despawn. And this is my player name. So it looks like that is the term for a dead unit, is despawned. So I'm actually hopeful this might work. So step through, I have my new group that's empty, keep stepping. It's now added 1 unit to this group, and now it's going to call the respawn. The dead horses table doesn't look any different, but I wonder if I right click and refresh if it'll show that it's no longer despawned. Surprisingly, there is no refresh. So maybe if I check it from the watch window, dead_horses. Okay, it still shows it as despawned. So I'm a little bit nervous that maybe this S group respawn did not work, but let's just keep going. So next there's squad set position. I'll step over that. Okay, it does not like that I sent it a table when it expected a squad star. I don't know what the asterisk means here, but in C++ that is a pointer. So that's my assumption. So it looks like it wanted me to send it an individual squad unit instead of a group of squad units. So that's probably going to crash my game, unfortunately. If I say script run and go back to the game, yeah, fatal error. So I'll hit OK, quit out of the game, change this to any squad, and then I'll move this set position inside of this for loop and pass in just the dead unit instead of the full S group. But I do also want to try to move the camera. I already did that before with this camera move to with my respawn marker position. So I'll copy this and paste it in my died event handler. But I'm a little bit nervous that this is going to force all the players' cameras to move when one horse dies. So let's see if I can do an if statement based on the current player and only move the camera if the dead unit belongs to the player. My assumption is that in order to avoid desyncs, meaning that in a multiplayer game, 2 different players have different code executing, probably every player has all of the code run, and so this camera move to would normally execute for every player when any horse dies, but it's actually only moving the current player's camera. So if I put an if statement to check which player's computer is currently executing the script, then I can make sure that they were the player with the dead horse. That's how it works in the Warcraft 3 map editor, but Age of Empires may be different. So I think I can do this with if game_get local player equals squad_get player owner of the dead unit. I'll do this inside the for loop, then move the camera and the for loop. I'm hoping that will prevent the camera from moving for any player that didn't die. And in that case, I probably should pan so that it's not too jerky. So I'll say true for panning, and I have no idea what scale to use for the pan rate. So I'll just use something like 0.5. Okay, let's rebuild, launch the game, play again skirmish, start game. No crash, so at least the script compiled. Let me suicide. I don't have any debugger breakpoints set right now. Okay, it looks like it failed on squad set position. It says it received a table for parameter 2 and expected a scar position. Let's check the respawn variable. Okay, that's true. It is a table of type marker. I was not aware that's how markers worked. I thought they were positions. So it looks like underneath the table is the position. There's probably a function for converting a marker table to a position. Okay, marker_get position with marker ID. I don't know what marker ID to pass, except the respawn table does have a marker ID field with value 2. So let's do marker get position with respawn.markerID. Okay, but that gave an exception. It wanted a scar marker to be passed in. Let's try marker get position with respawn. Okay, that worked. Sometimes you just have to try a bunch of things until something works. So I think on the squad set position for parameter 2, instead of passing respawn, I want to pass marker get position respawn. Let's try that. Okay, perfect. So it still gave me an error, but this time it's parameter 3 that's the error with essentially the same message. So I need to pass the position version for the third parameter as well. But now I got a different error that says teleporting squad failed. I was nervous that that might be the case because if it's a dead unit, maybe it's unwilling to teleport the unit. So I think we have the correct version of the code. Unfortunately, we weren't able to test the camera moving yet because the game will crash here and I can't skip this line. But I think we need to take this set position and move it down to after the respawn. So let's continue the code, which will crash the game. Then let's kill the game. And in the editor, I'll do the set position in a separate for loop. I'll copy this for loop and delete the camera code and the group adding code. I'll move the set position inside, and I can use the same count variable because even though it was originally the despawned units and now they're respawned, the count itself should still be the same. And I'm just going to read out of the dead horses group. So instead of reading the despawned squad, I'll just read the squad because it's no longer despawned. But instead of reading from horses, I need to read from dead horses. I'll copy and paste that variable over. Technically, it's not dead, so I could call it revived just for readability's sake. And I'll set the position on the revived unit to that location. Now, when I ran it in the watch window, it did not tell me why it would not set the position. I'm just assuming it's because the unit is dead. So if it still fails, I'll need to do more debugging. Let's remove these breakpoints, save and compile and try again. Launch the game, play again skirmish, start game, and suicide our horse. Okay, it still says teleporting squad failed. It does seem like it might be moving my camera, although extremely slowly. So that 0.5 value was not good. And I'm not sure if it actually respawned it. If it did respawn, it basically just died again instantly. I have no control of my camera at all. I can't move it because it's still trying to pan, although I can zoom in and out. So instead of 0.5, let's try 50 maybe. Let's do script attach again and restart and put a breakpoint on squad set position. Let's suicide again, and when the breakpoint happens, I'll try alternate versions of this set position. I feel like the sgroup respawn is not working because when I look at this revived variable, it still says health 0 out of 0, which makes it feel like it's despawned. And dead horses still shows it as despawned as well. Let's run this sgroup respawn from the watch to see if it gives an error of sorts. It doesn't give an error, it just returns nil. So I've decided to search my decompiled SCAR files, and I looked for the respawn keyword and I found a function called respawn leader that seems to do exactly what I want. It has a slightly different way of moving the unit, which I might try, but more importantly, it sets the health of the unit, it changes its inactive flag to false, and it clears the pending death flag. And finally, it calls this extra function leader recovery, which transfers the ownership back to the player. So I'm assuming I need to do all of those things to truly revive a unit. If that works, that's the type of thing that really should be coded into a utility function that's reusable, because that's a lot just to revive a unit. So I don't think it's worth it to try to test all of that in the watch. I may as well just code it and try again. So script run, let kill the game. I'll use this other method to move the unit. And even though the example code was using position, I'll try the marker way first, since I actually do have a marker. Revived and respawn location. If that fails, I will do warp to position with util underscore get position with my marker. But I'll comment these two lines of code out since I'm hoping this top one will work. And surprisingly, the example code was moving the unit before they even respawned it. In fact, I don't even think they called this sgroup respawn. So I'll comment that out since it doesn't seem to do anything anyways. Next, I'll get the entity from my revived unit, which I should rename since it's not actually revived yet, and put that into a entity variable. And I'll call entity set state model bool with the entity hero inactive. And it'll be interesting to see if this is necessary because this character isn't really a hero, it's just a normal unit. I'm not sure what this property is for, but the example code specifically was talking about a leader of some sort that's being revived. I'll set that to false, then entity clear pending death flag on the entity, and it specifically says it's for reviving leaders. Interesting. And I forgot, after I warp the unit, I need sgroup underscore set average health on the revived unit to 1, meaning 100%. I'm hoping that this will work, and honestly, I think I prefer to put it inside the original for loop and get rid of the dead horses group altogether. I don't want to lose this code in case I need to revive any of it, so I'll just copy it and paste it into Notepad, and then I'll just clean up this code. Remove dead horses, don't add it to the group, and then all this code to revive, paste it inside the first for loop, delete all this code I don't need, and change all the revived variables to dead. Finally, I decided the camera was moving way too slowly. Let's try 50 and see how that works. Save it, build, load the game, play again skirmish, start game, no crash yet, but I guess that makes sense because it doesn't actually run the event handler until I die. So when I suicide, invalid group squad during command stop. That's a bit confusing because I don't have a line of code with command underscore stop, but here you can see the call stack. I executed sgroup underscore warp to marker. Internally that called warp to position, and then inside of two other files, groups.scar and command.scar, which I did not write, it's calling this command.stop. So I think I sent it a squad and it wanted an sgroup. So instead of dead here for sgroup warp to marker, I should have passed in just the dead horses variable that I deleted, which I'm probably going to need on this set average health as well. But rather than rewriting this to add all of the units to that sgroup, just for simplification, I think I'll use the sgroup as a single item list because my function's probably only getting called with one horse anyways. So I'll paste in the code I had before, but instead of calling it dead horses, I'll just say horse E for one horse, and I will instantly clear it even though I'm inside of this for loop. So if there actually were two horses, when it loops over the for loop 2 times, each time the sgroup will get cleared and we'll call these methods separately. The benefit to these methods is they can be used on a list of units for performance reasons and to avoid unnecessary for loops, but I'm already in a for loop and the performance impact should be negligible. I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so warp to marker, we'll use dead horsey, and set average health, we'll also use that because they're both sgroup variables. But immediately after clearing the group, I need to add the dead unit to the group, which means I need to read the dead variable in between clearing and adding. I think this should work. In the future, I should maybe be more careful with my variable names. I'm learning that the difference between a squad and a squad group and an entity group is very important. So I may want to in the future add prefixes to variables, something like sg underscore dead and s underscore dead for s group and squad, just to make it easier to keep track of, but it's fine for now. Okay, next round of testing. Squad get first entity failed, no entities in squad. So this was where it was trying to clear the death flag, which was a new thing I found in the other example. I don't know if that's really necessary or not, and maybe only leader units can be respawned. I'm not sure. But what's interesting is the main thing that was failing before was warping it to a different position. That was giving me an exception, but this new version does not. It's possible I don't need this entity code and just the better version of moving the unit is all I needed. In addition, it did allow me to change the health, which you would think would revive it as well. Since I never got an error before when I tried to respawn the unit, I think I'll keep that code and maybe just remove this entity code. But I am curious about this death flag. If I search for that, is there anything else? For example, a squad death flag. It doesn't look like it. So I think I'll try again with this. If it's still not working, I might troubleshoot why there is no entity in the squad, because my understanding is every unit is both an entity and a squad. I'm wondering if the reason I can't get the entity is because it's dead or something. Maybe I need to test that by trying to get the entity here before it's died. Or maybe this function, squad get first entity, even though it says it wants a squad, maybe it actually wants a S group, because I've learned that the documentation is not always accurate. So let's try this and do another round of testing. Next round of testing, to aside my unit. Okay, that was interesting. My unit stayed dead, but the camera definitely panned me, and it felt like a decent speed for panning. But I don't see any unit that I have control of. I have the suspicion that it's not possible to revive a normal unit this way. It must have to be defined as a leader of some sort. I think what I need to do instead of trying to revive it is probably just spawn a brand new one. So first, once I have the dead unit, I will remove it from the horses group. S group underscore remove horses dead. Then this S group, I'll change to new horsey instead of dead horsey. And instead of adding the dead unit to this group, I will spawn a brand new unit. I can do that with BP underscore for blueprint, get squad blueprint, and pass in the name unit underscore scout underscore one underscore ENG, and save that to a variable. Next, unit entry underscore deploy squads, which needs a player, which will be the owner of the dead horse, and I need the ID of that player. Next, the group I want it deployed to, which is new horsey. So I actually don't need this S group add anymore. And then I need a table with options. I need to pass the blueprint and the number of squads to create. That goes into this units parameter. Entry method, stagger, and options can be ignored, and they'll just use default options. I could put this location into this deploy squads, and I shouldn't even need this health because it's going to default to 100% health. I'll comment this one out, and I'll move the respawn marker to the spawn parameter of deploy squads so I can comment out the warp to marker as well. I think this should correctly create my new horse. Now I need to take the S group for horses that I started with. The only purpose of it was to register these two events. I need to make sure the new unit is added to this group. So I'll say S group underscore add horses and S group underscore get bond squad at new horsey comma 1. So let's try this out. Save, build, run the game, play again skirmish, start game, and keep our fingers crossed. Of course, an error. Invalid parameter 2, type expected player received nil. I think I should not have passed .id here on deploy squad. So let's recompile and test one last time. Okay, I have a good feeling about this one. Okay, that worked perfectly. I will need to test with multiplayer, but I think this is solid. Now I've got to see, oh, he's so fast. He's hard to get away from. Now I need to see if I can actually get all the way to the end, to the island and end of the game. And finally, just some finishing touches like, oh, I did not expect that wolf. It came out of nowhere. I just died. I mean, I'm glad the game is hard. I'm sure once you've played it 10 times, you'll get the hang of it and it won't be hard, but that should be the fun of it, right? I am nervous when I get to the other sides of the map where there are more wolves, because it's hard when there's just one or two. Whoa, where did all of these wolves come from? I was not expecting like 4 in one spot. There's definitely some finishing touches I could and should do. For example, I almost have to lure the wolf away so I can get around him because there's 2 wolves really close to each other. Oh no, I went the wrong direction. I feel like I'm gonna die. I need to change my character to invulnerable just for testing, because if I get all the way to the end and it still doesn't work, I'm gonna be upset. Let's see if I can walk around the wolf. Looks like I can. Little secret shortcut here. So some finishing touches I think would be good. Obviously, changing the start window to tell the player the goal that they're supposed to get to the island would be helpful. I can't believe I still haven't died yet. I know I'm about to though. There's no way I survive here, right? Oh no, I got all the way here and died. I was so close. I'd say the difficulty is just about right. Okay, just for testing purposes, I think I will make my player run faster and make him invulnerable, but I'll have to remember to switch it back. Definitely for a version 2, I could add more advanced features, but I think the gameplay in general is solid for just a fun little mini game. Obviously not something you would keep playing over and over again. So let's test out this island. Quit out of the game, make my horse faster with more hit points, compile, and it would be smart to code something like that into this setup where I check if my name is the local player name, and if so, I modify my scout. That way I don't have to remember to keep changing back and forth, because if I do multiple rounds of testing and adding features, I'll always have to remember to reset these settings whenever I'm ready to publish, which would be annoying. I have taken some damage, but it's no big deal because I have 100 hit points. I still think it's so weird that the unit just gets big all of a sudden. I did not code that intentionally. I don't know why it does that, but it's actually super cool and scary. Okay, I'm about to where I was last time when I died. You know, the multiplayer aspect might be helpful because you might have to, as teammates, one person lures a wolf away while someone else tries to run through. Okay, I finally made it to the island. Okay, this is very annoying. It looks like I can't actually get to the island itself because I'm clicking and it's not letting me. I think the issue is this water is too shallow. So let me fix that real quick and then I'll retest, because we need to know if the trigger works to say that we win once we get to the center. Quit out. And then in the render tab and the scenario window, there's two options. We could either just raise the ground level or reduce the water level here, or the other option is there is something called an impasse map, which basically just says if you can walk there or not. It's designed where you have a left mouse and a right mouse for drawing and painting. So right now the right mouse has the eraser and the left mouse has the paint. So if I use my left mouse, it draws a green area, but if I use my right mouse, it erases that green area. So by looking at the settings, I've got infantry and vehicle selected, which I think should be fine. I don't need to mess with water because I don't have boats in this map, and I don't need to mess with building because I don't have villagers in this map. So I think essentially if I just draw this green right here, that means I can walk there. So let's save and build, start the game. Now, I'm not going to record the entire walk because you've seen it 10 times already and it's getting boring. So I'll just skip ahead to the end. Okay, almost there. Hopefully I can run through. You have got to be kidding me. That impasse map made no difference at all. I guess we'll try again. So the other option, instead of going to the impasse map, is we can go to the water height map. And same thing, our left brush is set for painting the height and our right brush is for erasing the height. You can mess around with different settings here, but I'll just left click and drag, and that seems to have completely gotten rid of the water. So I think that worked. I think I'll just go a little further to make it look like an island of sorts. Okay, it doesn't look perfect, but it's probably fine. Let's just double check the impasse map again. It's still showing red. I don't like that. I guess one other thing we could try is, instead of changing the water height, change the height of the ground. Same thing, just left click and drag. It looks really funny how I did it, but let's see if it fixed the impasse. Doesn't seem like it. So the really stupid and obvious answer is I could just move this marker up higher so that basically when you get to this edge, you've made it. But it feels sad to not actually be able to walk onto the island itself. I wonder if, even though changing the height doesn't fix the impasse map, and same thing with the water height, the impasse map stays red, I wonder if one of them actually does work. So let's try each one separately and then try all three together if none of them individually fixes it. So we'll start with the water height. I'll reduce it all so that it should be payable. Save, build. Okay, I actually could walk the whole way this time, so that fixed it. The game like froze on me, but I didn't get an error, but it didn't say that I won. So I can hit escape and quit out, but I feel like it should have announced that I won. I think it must have called this end mission. So the trigger works great, and it looks like fixing the height map worked great. I just need to figure out what's wrong with this end mission command. I think the reason it failed is because I'm using mission-o-matic end mission, but I'm not really in a single player campaign, so I don't really know how this is intended to work. If I look inside the code, I notice that it says game end single player. That seems wrong to me because, again, I'm not in the single player campaigns. But if I type core underscore set team victorious, I think that will work for multiplayer. And technically, if any player gets there, the whole team is considered to have won, which I guess could be annoying if you got halfway there and someone beat you to it, but that's all right. That's how the original map was in Warcraft 3, so I'm sticking with it. So I'll say player get team and game get local player. Now, I made it so all players are always allied, so no matter what, this will always be the same team. But get local player would be a bad idea to pass in here, as it would cause a desync if there was more than one team. The correct option would have been to register these event handlers separately and pass in the unit that got to the island. So then this data variable would have the horse and I could get his team. But I don't want to restructure the rest of my code, so this is the easiest option and it'll work. Next, for the presentation function, I don't want any special function. I'll just let the default happen. And for the reason they won, I'll say win reason underscore objective complete. I got this by searching for core set team victorious in the decompiled code, but I'm a little concerned that the objective complete was not found when I searched the documentation. So I'm hoping it actually works. Okay, let's just retest getting to the island to make sure the new win condition works correctly. Okay, it gave me an error. Attempt to index a number value local team. Let's attach and restart. I'm wondering if I'm passing a player ID and it expects me to pass a player object or vice versa. Okay, we're at our breakpoint. So in the watch, get local player is returning an actual player object. Get team with watch, returning team 0. I don't remember what the error was, but it was something about like that the team didn't exist or something. Okay, I think the issue is this is a team number and I think it wants a team object. So if I call core get teams entry from index with parameter 0, that's not very helpful. It's returning nil. Okay, I've added a few functions to the watch table and I think I found the issue. Player get team is returning 0, which does not seem correct because if I say core get player teams entry with the same player, I get a table and it has an index with value 1. So I think the team is actually supposed to be 1, not 0. So then when I tried to get the team's entry from index, I should have passed 1, which gives me the team table. There seems to be a bug in player get team, but I'll just take this team's entry and pass it to the victorious function. I'm hoping if I just pass this whole thing to the watch, I'm hoping I can continue the code, and even though this method will crash, I'm hoping the rest of the game will work, but I'll probably have to recompile. Script run, there's my error, script run, go back to the game. Oh, it actually does seem like it knows I won because it says view summary, which shows victory. Okay, perfect. I think that worked. Let's quit out. I think really the only other thing I want to change is just clicking on my scenario. If I go into the description, I just want to say, get your horsey to the safety of the island. And I've uploaded all of the code to my GitHub so that anyone else who wants to mess with this mod can. So I'll just put my GitHub link in that description. So I'm going to say that was a success. The only last thing I would probably change is this mod.png so that it doesn't look like it's in construction. I'll add some kind of thumbnail. But thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. And more importantly, let me know what kind of map you want me to create next. I'm thinking maybe I'll do a tower defense. Although this map was fairly simple, it was a big learning experience since I'd never done a map in Age of Empires before. Now that I have that experience, I think I'm ready to tackle a harder map. So hit that subscribe button so you can stay tuned for my tower defense video I create next.